newspaper articles just online saying, oh, this is a Dickian thing, or we live in a Phil Dick world. And my book that I wrote, and it just came out a few weeks ago, is actually an effort to try to dissect what that really means. What does it mean to live in a Phil Dickian world? And I'm not very attracted to some of the spiritual, some of the mystical aspects or the religious aspects of his writing. But I was very much attracted by some of the more economic, social, and political arguments he made. And I felt they've been often forgotten. So my book was also trying to do that, to try to tease out more of his economic and political philosophy. But where I actually want to start is with Times Square in the late 1980s. I think this is a good example of how in late capitalist economics, we see the transformation of physical space quite rapidly. And just as quickly as consumer space or consumer goods can shift under our feet, like a new version of a computer or a new iPhone, or even just shopping spaces. You know, you go to a mall and one store is gone and you don't remember what was there before. This is the kind of experiences that Philip Dick wrote a lot about in his novels. Well, I think that can happen these days really at the city scale. And I think Times Square is a good example of that. In a few short years, Times Square went from being a notorious center of cheap pleasures for the working class, a place of crime, of open sexuality, particularly a zone for homosexual activities, to becoming one of really the center of New York City's celebration of a corporate-led global modernity, a must-see destination for millions of tourists. And this transformation was actually documented by the science fiction writer Samuel Delany in a book called Times Square Red, Times Square Blue. So here, that's old Times Square, and here obviously is new Times Square. And here's one thing he wrote about this in that book. He said, with the rush to accommodate the new, much that was beautiful, along with much that was shoddy, much that was dilapidated, with much that was pleasurable, much that was inefficient, with much that was functional, is gone. So he's describing loss, both good and bad, but he's describing this as a process of losing something that, for him, was very important. The change was led by the 42nd Street Development Project, which wanted to rebuild Times Square into this tourist center where families could go to spend their money. Aiding them were New York City through various zoning laws, groups like Women Against Pornography through propaganda campaigns against pornography, and of course urban planners. Not consulted, Delany argues, were the many people, most of them poor, minorities, or gays, who relied on old Times Square, as a relatively open and relatively just place for pleasure, leisure, and autonomy. To quote him again, I didn't put this one up on the slide though. This event, the transformation of Times Square, is comprised of many smaller events, among them the destruction of acres of architecture, numberless commercial and living spaces, and so far the permanent obliteration of over 2 dozen theater venues. What is lost, now this is back to my words, what is lost here was the day-to-day interactions between the classes, which is required for democratic life. Geographical separation in urban spaces perpetuates class divisions and class prejudices, and I think this is a good example of that. Actually, this is not the first time this happened, obviously. As you may know from history, in the 1850s and 1860s, Baron Haussmann rebuilt Paris and built the wide streetways. This was actually an effort not only to invest capital and to develop, modernize the city, but also to make it more difficult for the people of Paris to rebel. It was an effort to put down urban revolt. This is the Empire State Plaza in Albany, New York. This is an interesting story. It was constructed only after the displacement of about 9,000 working class people. And here's what the neighborhood looked like before Empire State Plaza came in. Governor Nelson Rockefeller had the idea of rebuilding this neighborhood into the plaza after he was embarrassed to show a Dutch princess the realities of life in the city that he was ruling New York from. Now, strangely, the incredible investment in rebuilding of U.S. cities has taken place at the same time that government programs are privileging suburban versus urban voters. People living in suburbs tend to be more affluent, more consistent taxpayers, and therefore more deserving of government infrastructure, development, good schools, a rich safety net, and all that. Urban renewal, in other words, is ensuring that the poor will see their communities altered, demolished, and replaced. Disinvestment in public services will ensure that the poor have no support in rebuilding their lives and communities after these destructive acts. The equivalent of the renovation of Times Square is taking place in urban areas all over the world. And Taipei, I think, is a great example of this. All of us living here know this. No urban resident can fail to appreciate the experience that Delaney describes. Buildings that shaped our childhood are torn down. Stores and shopping malls change so often that consumers can stop trying to keep up. And the entire character of neighborhoods transforms so dramatically that we lose the ability to communicate with our new neighbors. Most urban residents have internalized or come to terms with the constant shifting of reality. And this brings me to the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman. Really old. He defined, through a series of books written over the last decade or two, this concept of liquid modernity. And I'll get to his quote here in a second. But according to him, according to Bauman, the world we live in is a world governed by the rules of liquidity. Institutions, people, relationships, ideas, urban landscapes, and fashion all take on the characteristics of liquids, capable of filling any possible container and shifting the ground we stand on as it does. Those institutions, concepts, or people that fail to become liquid are doomed to be left behind in a global rat race for survival, where being left behind means condemnation to becoming the waste of late capitalism. To quote Bauman here, like all liquids, it cannot stand still and keeps its shape for long. Everything, or almost everything in the world of ours keeps changing. Fashions we follow and the objects of our attention. Things we dream of and things we fear, things we desire and things we love. What Times Square and so many urban locations teach us is that liquid modernity affects much that was once assumed to be solid, like cities, and the neighborhoods we grew up in, the communities we relied on for our identity, for our autonomy, for our education, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I want to jump to Philip Dick now. And I actually think Philip Dick can teach us a lot about this transformation I'm trying to describe here. And let me start with his 1954 story, Adjustment Team. It actually was made into a movie called Adjustment Bureau, which I haven't seen. Maybe someone here has seen it and can comment on it. It actually foreshadows what I was just trying to describe happened in Times Square. In Adjustment Team, a group of bureaucrats carefully transformed the city bit by bit in hopes of putting an end to the Cold War. When things work well, the team arranges for all the important people to be in a building before it will be adjusted. So the idea is you kind of freeze everyone, change things around, change people's clothing, put people in different locations of power, and then kind of restart the whole thing. It's a bit like that movie Dark City, perhaps you've seen it. It's a very similar idea. Like the changes in Times Square, these are subtle in the short term, but significant over the long term. Many are hardly noticeable. But due to a bureaucratic error, our main character in the story, Ed Fletcher, is not in the building at the proper time. I think his ride came late, so he wasn't in the office at the time that the adjustment began. So we actually got to witness what was going on. Quote from the story, "A section of the building fell away. It rained down, a torrent of particles, like sand. Ed gaped foolishly, a cascade of gray debris spilling around his feet. And when he had touched the building, a jagged cavity yawned, an ugly pit marring the concrete." Fletcher later learns that the bureaucrats, the adjustment team, are slowly changing the city to ensure that certain events take place. Most importantly, they want to put an end to the Cold War and the Cold War threat of nuclear annihilation by creating an international scientific event that will lead to the cooperation of Soviet and Western European scientists, leading to an international society and global cooperation. So this is the plan. And it's very subtle, but the idea is that if you can put the right people at the right place at the right time, you'll be able to create this international cooperation and it will end the Cold War. The details aren't important. The essential point is that from the bureaucrat standpoint, the adjustments and the deception at the heart of them, the lies that they rest on, are essential for the survival of humanity. Anything is justifiable if it ensures the end of this Cold War. They take on the role more of Olympian gods, attempting to interfere in and direct the course of history, rather than that of the fates, for instance, comfortable only in watching the events pass by. Fletcher, unable to do much but accept this logic, conforms to the wishes of the adjustment team.
Can we ask questions?
Yeah, you can jump in and ask a question.
There was a Cold War, and people of two sides, they don't know what they're thinking of other side, and people from the other side, from the Soviets, cannot come and visit the US side. So how people of Soviet people can influence the way of thinking of the Americans? What that our intention, that the intention of Soviets is peaceful?
Well, Dick writing in 1954 was, of course, writing in the center of Cold War anxieties. And he wasn't uninfluenced by American values about the Cold War and about Russia. Many of his descriptions of the Soviet sphere are rooted, I think, in misunderstandings. I'm not suggesting here that Dick had an objective and perfect view about the Cold War realities. But in this story, what is going on is that these bureaucrats are trying to get around the Cold War by transforming space. Right? It's seen as a crucial thing. And I'm struck by how similar the methods are to urban planners are these days. If you make these little changes day to day, to try to transform the city into something different. Whether it could be the eco-city, the green city, or just modernizing urban spaces. And I think they're costly. I do think there's cost involved in this, and that's the point I want to make. In the story, the cost is, of course, people lose the right to choose. They don't have a say. The bureaucrats have taken over that role.
People can change the environment, and they...
Yes. Well, the people in power can change the environment. Right? It's an undemocratic thing. That's what I'm getting at.
So if people in power are taking the policy of keeping the Cold War, if people of power has one way of designing the urban space, the people without power, they cannot influence it unless the environment can be evolved sometime.
Yeah, well, I think that's the world we live in largely, in cities. I think very few people feel they have much say over the development of their cities. Just take like the housing bubble in Taipei. Most people are opposed to it, but they feel relatively powerless to stop it. And I think that's pretty much the case with urban development across the world. Now, there are, of course, democracies at the city level, but they're relatively weak, and I think we have a long way to go towards people really having control. We have a long way to go before people have what, I forget who called it this, an intellectual 50 years ago, I think, talked about the right to the city, giving people control from developers, from capital, in envisioning and making the city on their terms. In a sense, what I'm trying to get at here is the problem of bureaucracy.
Let's try to keep most of the questions to the end, so we can make sure that Evan can get through his entire speech. Go ahead.
Okay, well, let me jump ahead to another story, the cosmic puppets. It's actually a novel from 1957. One of his early books, I think, helps us summarize the relationship between shifting urban environments and liquid modernity. And that's The Cosmic Puppets. It takes as its core the idea of the interchangeability of cities and suburbs, and the tendency of urban space to change dramatically or subtly, usually without the full awareness, and certainly without the consent of residents. The Cosmic Puppets is one of Philip Dick's earliest novels, exploring the theme of a fungible or alternate reality, which is really what he's most well known for, by the way. Most of his novels get kind of categorized, or one reason they're popular is because they deal with this idea that the reality we see is not the reality, is not the real reality. There's some reality behind the screen, right? If you just can kind of tear down the stage, or the background of the stage, we'll see the real reality, right? Which may or may not be the ultimate reality. And Cosmic Puppets is one of the first novels to do this really well. So the opening chapter of this novel presents a common enough problem. Ted Barton is taking a trip with his wife to his hometown of Millgate, Virginia. He finds the hometown unrecognizable. He expected some changes, and he was in fact eager to see those changes and describe them to his wife. Quote, his town, where he'd been born, raised, and spent his childhood. He had never expected to see it again. Oh, and to see it again, to see how it changed, was something that excited him. But his experience of change is so total that any recognizable characteristic in Millgate is gone. Yet, this is something I think that's not uncommon in our liquid world, where the pace of change makes us feel that we don't have a firm setting to any one place, and that changes occur faster than we can process them. The important people in our lives change year to year. New jobs, new wife, right? New friends. We move to a different city, and we've got a new friend. We lose contact with our family. This is stuff that really happens to us. New construction or decaying communities make our idyllic memories of our youth cruel abstractions. Pictures present only dubious, partial suggestions of how things were. Our memories, collective and individual, are not to be trusted. If there's one thing surprising in the early chapters of The Cosmic Puppet, is that Barton is so immediately sure that Millgate has changed. As the novel develops, we learn that his memory is uncanny. Most of us experience this constant plasticity, this liquidity of our worlds with a bit more uncertainty. And then one last novel to throw at you on this question of urban planning. 1963, The Game Players of Taipei. It reads to us like a metaphor for the arbitrary power of those who control over urban space. So we're given a depopulated world where the remaining people literally play with almost unpopulated cities, using them as tokens in high-stake gambling. Without people to disturb their machinations and their games, the Earth-based game players are entirely free to do what they want with urban spaces that they win. Like the late capitalist urban planner, the game players care little about the actual lives cities once had. They are corpses to be traded, reformed, or reimagined. For them, the stakes are low. As one player, Joe Schilling, asked another, or you'll lose Martin County just like you lost Berkeley, and then what you'll do? The world can't use 2 rare record shops. The other reply is, well, I'd become a farmer. They exist in a purely liquid world where nothing is solid, in ownership or in design. The function of the cities is the design of the temporary owners and can change with the wind, or more accurately, with the luck of the gaming table. The Game Players of Titan is also a condemnation of the values, lifestyles, power, and indifference of the ruling class, and as such provide a window into how the elite see urban residents. In point of fact, in the novel, the masses barely register, except as a threat or a tool. Since most of the Earth is depopulated in the novel, the high-stakes games is not quite as high as they sound. But from the perspective of the ruling elite, there are not so many people who really matter. Their gaze obscures the vast majority of us. Living in gated communities, moving around cities by helicopter or limousines, attending exclusive parties, and opening night receptions, the elite can go through life with an awareness, with very little awareness of the existence of most of us. Dick uses the science fiction tool of low fertility and a dwindling post-apocalyptic population to suggest how the game players actually see us. if a couple tens of millions of the underclass disappeared, it actually would barely register within the gated communities. It may not even affect the cost of labor, a detail they have long ago passed on to middle managers. So what do we know about the game players in the novel? Well, first we know that they cheat each other using psychics to predict who's going to win a game. Second, they're often massive users of drugs. Third, they're sexually promiscuous, despite having an institutionalized system of wife swapping. Fourth, they carry out irrational grudges over the ownership of property that they cannot even dream of getting a handle on. The protagonist, for instance, loses the town of Berkeley. They are, in short, delusional, degenerate, and overall disgusting. And I want to suggest this is Philip Dick's view of the ruling class. Okay, so let me jump ahead. Just introduce my book. Here's my plug for my book, I guess. Let me jump back here. You see the cover here, Philip K. Dick and the World We Live in. This is the book I wrote, trying to argue that Dick is a very good guide to late capitalism. He's not a prophet. He's not predicting anything that he couldn't have seen in the 50s and 60s. But he is a very useful guide. He wrote over 40 novels and over 100 short stories. He also wrote a very massive theological text called Exegesis, which was unpublished during his life, which many people are very interested in these days. Frederick Jameson called him the Shakespeare of science fiction. Some of his most well-known novels are Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which was turned into the movie Blade Runner. A Scanner Darkly, which was also turned into a film. Flowed My Tears, The Policeman Said. These are some of his more well-known works. Many of his short stories have also been made into films. So he's mostly known now as being the source material for a lot of these Hollywood films. So in this book, I attempt to interpret Philip Dick's metaphysical speculations about shifting realities in terms of economic, social, and cultural trends in late capitalism. That's kind of to sum up what I'm trying to do here. And here are some of the themes I explore. One, and I'll get to this in a minute, is the impact of technology on work and employment. And this kind of will build off what we talked about 2 weeks ago with Utopia, because we did a little bit of the robot stuff there. The rise of the surveillance state, the loss of privacy, the whole question of marriage and family is something that Dick really wrestled with in almost every one of his novels. The broken family, the broken marriage is one of the most common themes. I'm not going to talk about it today, but it's a big theme in the book. The question of global governance, whether it's going to be democratic or imperial, mental illness. In fact, we just saw this in the news with this horrific airplane crash. Immediately we jumped to depression, mental illness as the cause of that. Not looking necessarily at the systemic situation there. And I know it's way too early to come to a conclusion about what happened there, but I'm just noticing that many people are jumping to the mental illness aspect of it, rather than other things that may have been at play. New religious movements and spirituality, which I may get to today, consumerism and urban planning. These are all themes I talk about in the book. And I think they're things that are relevant to our lives, and they really are the major themes in Philip Dick's work. Okay. So, let's talk about work. The dream of labor-saving technologies has become such a nightmare that few of us hold anymore much faith that a future without drudgery is possible. Now, I like to think it, but I'm not sure. I'll get to why I think this is a troubling vision. Kim Moody, a scholar of labor, has shown that for the average industrial worker, the greatest threat is not outsourcing or the apparent fantasy of robot factories emerging, but lean production. Lean production increases the amount of labor extracted from the worker in a day through a variety of managerial techniques. Neither can we forget things like the massive Foxconn factories in China, the largest of which in Shenzhen had hundreds of thousands of workers living in massive dormitories. Just to put it bluntly, work is not going anywhere, despite technology. But there are many who don't seem to be very lucky to have jobs anymore. Many face the prospect of, or the reality of, permanent underemployment or unemployment. While the economy still needs billions of workers, there's a growing number of people that are just unwanted. They don't have the skills, they don't have the right passport, they're in declining industries. They're people who just are not needed by the economy. And that's the tension I want to I want us to think about a little bit. It may be due to a lack of education, a lack of connections, ethnicity, gender, or just the fact that you grew up in a slum. Jeremy Rifkin estimated in 1995, so this is 20 years ago, that 16 million or 13% of American workers were lacking full-time employment. According to a 2011 Gallup poll, 39% of 15 to 29-year-olds are underemployed or unemployed in the U.S. Of people 30 to 49, 20% fall in that category. Of the lucky young people who have found employment, only 54% express satisfaction with their jobs. But those are still the lucky ones, if we look globally. Numerous others have become economic refugees or migrants. Zygmunt Bauman again, the guy I mentioned before, he has discussed the dual realities of migration in a global economy as the opposition between the vagabonds and the tourists. We're either, everyone's moving, he says in short, but we're either a vagabond or a tourist. Migrants are not only economically exploited, but they're dislodged from their agricultural foundations, or wherever they had the root of their identity and social kind of community, right? When we're talking about millions of peasants moving from China, moving from the places where they had an identity, a community, an idea about themselves, to places where they're going to not have that, where they're going to feel lost. It's almost inevitable. Now we can say this has happened throughout history to other people. Sure, I don't think it's necessarily a new phenomenon, but it's happening at a scale much more aggressively than ever before. So as a consequence of this, migrants rarely have protection from economic or sexual exploitation, and are often seen as a permanent other in the places they go. Globalization, which promised to break down the walls between people, between societies, has succeeded in creating dual realities in every city of the world, with intense and well-organized systems of surveillance and exclusion. So here's what Bauman wrote, right below the global poor. Once emancipated from space, capital needs no more itinerary labor. And so the pressure to pull down the last remaining barriers to the free movement of money and the money-making commodities and information goes hand in hand with the pressure to build new moats and erect new walls, barring the movement of those who are uprooted, spiritually or bodily, in the result. Green light for tourists, red light for vagabonds.
I will grow crooked, you can't make straight. It's the price that you gotta pay. Do yourself a favor and pack your bags. Buy a ticket and get on the train. Buy a ticket and get on the train. This is fucked up, fucked up. 'Cause this is fucked up, fucked up. People get crushed like biscuit crumbs, only down in the bitumen. You have tried your best to